Hello, and welcome to Mornings with Joel, commercial real estate podcast, where we focus on rising stars and established players in commercial real estate and talk to them about how they are building legacies in today's marketplace. Well, hey, we'd like to welcome all to the Mornings with Joel CRE podcast. We're very excited to have you with us today and listening to this podcast. We have a special guest with us today, Clive Davis. No, not the promoter Whitney Houston and so many other artists, but Clive Davis, the real estate investor and multifamily mogul. I guess we'll call you that to some degree. So we appreciate you being here, Clive, and thank you for being in attendance with us. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Joel. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to sharing with the audience.
Good. So if you don't mind, just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and, kind of how you got started in this commercial real estate space altogether, because I understand your background is in law. It's not actually in real estate. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I professionally got started out as a corporate transactional lawyer, working for a Wall Street firm and servicing that clientele, the investment banks. Started out in New York City, servicing the investment banks and by extension, their clients. So Fortune 100 companies, generally speaking. So I was doing debt and equity offerings, among other things, for several years out of law school. Then made the transition to in-house counsel with Pfizer, which is in the news these days for all the right reasons. And so I was a lawyer in-house for Pfizer for 6 years, the last 2 of which they had actually transferred me from New York to Atlanta, which is how I arrived in Atlanta going on 17 years ago now.
Okay.
After finishing up my time with Pfizer, I went on to become a chief compliance officer for a Belgian pharma company, headquartered in Brussels globally, and then U.S. headquarters in Atlanta. And so I did that for a total of 9 years. So all in all, I had a 20-year corporate career with different legal and compliance roles. Throughout that time, I will say that I was invested in real estate, but mostly small multifamily, small rental holdings that I wouldn't say I was managing professionally. I was self-managing from wherever I was at the time, whether that was New York or Atlanta. And I had investments in properties in Florida as well as in New York. So I always had this kind of aspiration or interest in real estate, always kind of flirted with the idea of being an entrepreneur, but not necessarily knowing what that looked like. And so at the end of 2016, that's when I made the decision that 20 years was a good run. And if not now, when? And so I totally flipped the script and walked away from the W-2 and kind of started pursuing this journey that I'm on now and have been on for the last 5 years, all working towards acquiring large-scale multifamily communities. And we can get into more of those details.
Yeah, that's exciting. So let's dive back into that a little bit, because you certainly know this as well as I do at this point. I'm actually an old Wall Street guy as well. So we certainly have those roots. And what's interesting about it is that there's really a different mindset that you have to have in order to go out here and stake your own claim, if you will, as an entrepreneur. There's a lot of people that stand on that ledge of entrepreneurship and they're like, nah, if I fall, it's just too painful to hit the ground. So they wind up not doing that and they retreat back into that W-2 world. What do you think it was on your end that really just kind of pulled you out to say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do this? Was it the prep building up of owning properties that kind of gave you that comfort level to do that? Or what would you say it really was that made you jump out there and get this done?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Joel. Most people will never venture outside of their comfort zone. And in order to transition into the entrepreneurial world, it requires you to do that. So the longer you've been doing something, in my case, 20 years in corporate America, you get to a point where that's very comfortable. Your growth is probably somewhat stagnant. You're not growing by leaps and bounds, in your 20th year. And also the golden handcuffs become tighter. So with each passing year, you're being compensated more handsomely, and it becomes harder to walk away. For me, there were a few things going on one, I was in my mid 40s, and I said, if not now, when? I had my oldest child at the time who was going to be heading off to college. And so in addition to that, I had my mom who was having some health challenges, kind of bouncing between hospital and home. And I just said, this is an opportunity for me to just, do a timeout, kind of assess where I'm at. What I tell people is, for me, I look at it as being precarious to be solely reliant on a W-2 with no other forms of income coming in. And so I think that is risky. Yeah. And it requires a mindset shift to start looking at things that way, because, I say to folks, in venturing out on this entrepreneurial journey, for me, I knew worst case scenario, if for whatever reason it didn't work out, I could always go find a 6-figure job. I'm not saying that to be boastful or anything.
No, it's true.
But that's my downside protection. I have a law degree. I have 20 years of corporate life and experience. Worst case scenario, I worked on the assumption that, if this pursuit doesn't work out, I'm still going to pay the bills. We're still going to eat. I can figure out a way to make it happen. So my safety net, again, shifting mindsets, my safety net became falling back on, I can go get a job if need be. Whereas most people in corporate life, they're thinking with a mindset of, this is a good paying job. I've got benefits associated with it. I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. What I tell people is, a good job or a high paying job, highly compensated job can be good today and non-existent tomorrow. You can go in and they can say, Joel, we appreciate your years of service, but we no longer have a need for your role, or we no longer have a need for you.
Yep.
And so you go from being highly compensated W-2 employee to no compensation. And that's a drastic shift. And so, I'm always talking about diversifying your income streams. Even if you decide, I love what I'm doing in corporate life, you should still, and this is really my avatar investor, is the highly compensated individual whose demands on their time is very high. They don't necessarily have the time to be an active investor, but they have an opportunity to participate in passive investment opportunities of the kind that I present to them. So for me, it was really about venturing outside of my comfort zone, developing muscles that I hadn't necessarily needed in my corporate roles. I talk to people about the importance of networking, true networking and relationship building. Frankly, I could be very successful. I was successful in my corporate life without having to network in the way that I have been for the last 5 years, where it's the lifeblood of everything that you do if you're trying to pursue real estate deals in the commercial real estate space. So it's really about venturing outside the comfort zone. So the first thing I did in 2017, no W-2 now, unemployed by choice, was to go buy an apartment community, a commercial apartment community, a 5-unit. And as you know, Joel, once you're 5 units and above, you're in the commercial realm. 4 units and less, it's residential.
Right.
And it's important. It's an important distinction because the lending protocols are different depending on whether you're residential or commercial.
Yeah.
And so I didn't necessarily appreciate that as much, again, when I was in corporate life, because that was my world. I'd grown accustomed to having a W-2. And so if anyone ever asked me for my pay stubs and tax returns, no problem.
Yeah.
And then I moved into a world where, if I were to go get even a single family rental, a duplex, triplex, fourplex, one of the first things a bank is going to ask you is 2 years tax returns and your last 2 pay stubs. And when you tell them that you don't have pay stubs, you don't have a W-2, that doesn't compute for them. And so they try and, squeeze a peg into a square, and it's not going to fit.
Yeah.
So for me, it was, okay, let's get outside the comfort zone. So I went and bought a 5-unit down in Florida, in the same place where my parents were, trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because that would give me the opportunity to spend more time with my aging parents. And I'd also be able to do what I considered really a proof of concept purchase or acquisition of that 5 unit and see, Clive, is this really something that you want to do? So, kind of fast forward, I'm giving you the short version, but I acquired a 5 unit, renovated 4 of the 5 units, gut renovated 1, had to evict a hoarder out of one of the units. So all of the joys of being a landlord. And then it afforded me the opportunity to spend 2 weeks out of the month down in Florida with my parents, which, prior to that, I was lucky if I was able to see them twice a year, given the demands of my corporate role and the travel to Brussels, to Sao Paulo, to Mexico City, whatever. And so one of the things that I was thinking about at this time period, Joel, is how do I reclaim ownership of my time?
Yeah.
So when you
yeah. I mean, interrupt you, but that is the biggest thing. I try to teach my kids that all the time. It's time,
Yeah. So you might be highly compensated, and I was highly compensated, but someone else owned my time, and so I was trading my time for money.
Yep.
And so it requires you, again, we're talking about mindset shift. You need to wean yourself off of the exclusive reliance on that one income. And you also have to change your mindset to, I'm going to pursue things that enable me to take back my time. There's a lot of mindset shifting that is taking place as you transition out of that comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're completely on the same page about all of that because when you're young, you think the biggest asset is money. But as you get older, you realize it's time. Time is your most valuable asset. The ability to do what you want to do with your time is most valuable. And a corporate job just usually will not give you that, from that standpoint. So in order to claim your time back, you have to be able to do something else. So that's interesting. If you look at that model, you started off with kind of a plan of just going to a 5 unit. I'm assuming the idea may have been to be able to stay in one of the units while you were down there and maybe rent it out, or were you doing that as kind of an Airbnb scenario, or?
No, I was actually staying with my parents because, again, I was trying to kill 2 birds, and so it gave me the opportunity to be in the house with them, providing some measure of assistance to my mom and my dad as needed. So all 5 units were rented. It was really, like I said, it was a proof of concept. I wanted to do something. I didn't want to be idle. And so I'm all about taking action. Mm-hmm. And so while that's the lowest end of the commercial multifamily real estate scale, you're in the game. And so I wanted to be in the game, and that got me in the game. I ended up holding that until the end of Q1 of 2020. And then I ultimately sold that, did very well with that property. But, late in 2017, 2018, I just said, okay, no more of this small stuff. I need to navigate towards large scale multifamily. And so I started on a journey of educating myself and immersing myself in that world. Uh-huh. And just surrounding myself with people who were doing the things that I wanted to do. And so early on, I had started, first of all, I had moved my retirement funds, my legacy retirement funds from my prior employers. I moved that into a self-directed IRA. Uh-huh. Prior to, leaving corporate life, I didn't even know what a self-directed IRA was. And I came to learn that, there are other options. You don't need to just leave it there or turn it over to Fidelity and have them tell you put 60% here, 30% here, and 10% here in one of these 12 baskets. Right. And so the self-directed IRA gives you the opportunity to invest in pretty much, there are only like 2 investment categories you cannot invest in. I think collectibles is one, and I forget the others, but you can invest in anything from thoroughbred horses and thoroughbred horses sperm to oil. That sky's the limit. Right. I think probably 60 to 70% of self-directed IRA funds are actually in commercial real estate. And that's where I chose to invest. And so I invested in multifamily across the country, from California to Texas to Florida, Georgia, certainly some in New York. And so that enabled me to see how high-level institutional quality sponsors put these deals together, how they put together the capital stack, what investor relations look like, how did they promote these opportunities. And so while I was looking for a return on my investment for each of these investments, the bonus for me was really, I'm educating myself to do, whether it's 12 months away, 18 months away, or longer, I was preparing myself for, I'm going to be doing deals of this type and this size. And so, I'm investing where I believe and where I'm going. All of that was part of my education. I started listening to podcasts. Prior to, in corporate life, I don't think I ever listened to a podcast start to finish. Late 2016, 2017, I was listening to 3 or 4 podcasts a day, focused on multifamily and just learning. And so it's informal education, but it's no less valuable than anything that many of us did on a college campus. And so that's where I was investing my time. The final piece of the education was joining a mentoring program, apartment investing mentoring program, again, where I'm surrounded by people who believe in multifamily, who invest in multifamily, and some people who actively own and operate multifamily. And so that, for me, I tell people, whenever you decide to get with a mentor, the goal should be to collapse or compress the timeline of what it would otherwise take you to obtain that experience, knowledge, information to accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So let's say that it would take 3 years of me fumbling around via Google and YouTube and what have you, and trying to piece together a program. If you get with a mentor, they should be slashing that time, and that should be, 12 months. So going from 36 months to 12 months, and that's what you're paying for. And so that's what I did, and that kind of catapulted me in my journey in pursuit of large-scale multifamily.
All right, that's fantastic. The thing about it, and we're probably close to the same age if you look at it from that standpoint, and you start thinking, okay, how many years do I have left to really make this happen? It's like when you first get out of school, you say, okay, I got this 20 years to accomplish this, and then you're 40, and you're like, okay, I got 20 years to accomplish this next thing, but you get to the point where it's like, okay, I'm running out of these 20-year windows. Right. So if you're going to do it, like you mentioned earlier, why not now? And one good thing that's certainly admirable is you went out and instead of saying, I've got this all figured out, I'll do it myself as a lawyer, you could simply say, I know how to read legal documents, so I'll just do it on my own. But you went out there and got someone to kind of educate you and direct you in the right path. And in 5 years, to cut down on that window so dramatically and own the amount of units that you own is pretty impressive, from that standpoint. So, you walk the walk and implemented what you learned.
Yeah, and the one thing that you learn, again, we'll revisit limited mindsets. So in corporate life, I had a mindset that, if I'm going to go invest in real estate, it's going to be the extent to which I'm able to invest is going to be dependent on what I have in the bank. So what do I have in savings? What can I come up with in terms of a deposit? When you're buying large-scale multifamily, it is a team sport. Yeah, and so people don't just, even if you're sitting on 7 figures, people don't just put 7 figures into these deals. You want to have some skin in the game, and you want to be able to articulate that to your prospective investors so that they know that, okay, I believe in the project and opportunity, and I'm sharing it with them, and I have something to lose if the deal were to go left. So it's important to have something in the game. I don't believe in you can do these deals with no money down or no money. You definitely got to have something some stake in the game, but you are doing it where you're leveraging a lender of some sort. And then you're leveraging private investors who you're able to share the opportunity with. And then you're coming together with other partners who are each playing a role to make the deal happen. So I think there was a question in the chat box about putting together the initial capital stack. So maybe if I get into some specifics.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a good segue. Uriah is a regular on the show, and it's leading right into what you were talking about. How did you do that? So let's jump in right now. We can go ahead and discuss that.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is I am not an overnight success. I believe in getting rich slowly. And so from the very first time that I submitted an offer in April of 2019 on a 92 unit, I believe, it took me the better part of just over 2 years before I landed my first deal. So that's me submitting LOIs, letters of intent, being best and final, being a runner-up, doing buyer interviews, and ultimately not prevailing until summer of 21. I was awarded a 244 unit here in Atlanta, 70s vintage property that we acquired for just under 30 million. And we closed on that in November of 21. So we raised 8.25 million in equity. We had a loan of approximately 25 million. And so, we went out to our network and shared the opportunity with them. And we raised that 8.25 million with a minimum investment of 75,000. So most people clustered around that 75,000, but others put it in multiples of that. Mm-hmm. That's how we were able to do the first deal. I had 3 partners, all of whom were part of that mentoring group that I mentioned earlier. So another benefit beyond kind of just the education is who are the people that you are associating with and have an opportunity to potentially partner with who are going to enable you to do a deal like that. So, going from the 5 units to 244 units doesn't happen without you being a member of a team and drawing upon the expertise and experience of, others who are further along in their real estate investing journey than you are, because one of the things that you're going to need to do is to establish credibility. And so I could tell a broker, hey, look at me, I'm Clive, I'm a Ivy League educated lawyer, give me the deal. Right. And that means nothing to them. They could care less about that. They could care less about my 20-year corporate career. They could care less about how many units I've been a passive investor on. Their primary concern is, if I'm going to put you in front of my client, the seller, I need to be comfortable that you have the ability to close this transaction. and I don't want egg on my face. So the easiest path, the path of least resistance for them is, let me just go to one of the people I've done business with before and see if they're interested. Or if I've not done business with them before, someone who has a track record that I can point to. Oh, they've just closed 3 deals in the last 6 months. Right. Yeah, they're likely going to be able to close this with no issues. So again, to overcome that, you've got to associate yourself with existing credibility. And that's where the team comes into play. And so the partners that I was able to connect with, each of them had done deals. None of them had done deals in Georgia or Atlanta. That put me and put us in a better position in competing for opportunities than if it was just me trying to leverage my resume. That would not have gotten it done.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. So 75,000, you got together with some teammates, if you will, as part of that deal, and that gave you the credibility in order to get the thing done. Obviously, they had already done deals before, so you can put that on that resume, and that certainly works out. You're right, you brought this also up. Could you share insights on what you did to attract investors? Was there a presentation implement or template or framework you used to present the opportunity? Very good question. How would you answer that, Clive?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically the way, I pursued, I shouldn't assume. So we did this via a syndication model. So the syndication model, this is a securities offering. We're going out, in our case, we went out to friends and family, but really, in my case, at least, there was no family money in the deal. And I generally, unless you are, of a certain stature, in the case of these opportunities, you're either an accredited investor, so you make $200K a year for the last 2 years with an expectation of making that or more in the current year. If you're a couple, the threshold is $300,000. There are some other ways that you can qualify for accredited investor status, including your net worth, if it's $1 million or more, excluding your personal residence. And then they've subsequently introduced some licensures that will enable you to qualify that way. So the bulk of the people that we're going out to are accredited investors. You're also able, if you're doing a Reg D 506B, which is basically the friends and family avenue of offering these opportunities. If you're going that way, you can offer it to up to 35 sophisticated investors, and I'm using air quotes, up to 35 sophisticated investors. So that's where, the folks who don't hit that 200K threshold, but yet they're sophisticated in some other ways. Maybe they have their own business, maybe they've done investments in the past. You can include those folks despite them not being accredited investors. So the way that we do it is once we get a deal once we have an accepted LOI, we blast out to our network and let them know, hey, we've gotten our LOI accepted. We're negotiating the contract. We're going to be bringing forward this opportunity. Here's what it roughly looks like. We'll get into all of the details during the webinar, in 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then in the interim, we're pushing out information. So, we push out an information that says, we're now under contract. We've now concluded due diligence. All of that is in the build up to that webinar where we're going to present the deal fully, present our pro forma, present our underwriting, and also do Q&A. So that's the typical protocol of how we present these opportunities.
Gotcha. So do you normally do that with one webinar, or do you do multiple webinars, or is it just driven by the response?
Yeah, so I've only been, the 2 deals that I've done, I've only done one webinar, and you're getting expressions of soft commitment all the way up to the webinar. So it's even possible that you could be fully subscribed before you even get to your webinar if the deal is really attractive. But one webinar to answer your question.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. And you're right. You keep hitting us with these questions. Is it possible to come on the mic and share with us your thoughts, or are you somewhere where it's noisy in the background?
No, I'm actually I'm here. I didn't know if you were doing a different format for this particular podcast, but good morning, everyone.
No, it's a little early for Q&A, but we're gonna let you in. So go ahead and share your thoughts. You had another question here, so I'll let you have the floor.
No, this is a great conversation, Mr. Davis. Essentially, a lot of the things, and I joined a little later on. I had to take a call, but essentially, a lot of the things that you're speaking on is simply reinforcing some high level assumptions that I've came up with as I look to build out the framework for my first deal. Being new to CRE, have a great idea that I'm working on, and so. Thank you for sharing your insights. The self-directed IRA approach is an approach that I've been exposed to. I haven't actually set up one yet. And I was actually thinking about leveraging a similar strategy in terms of rolling over a legacy 401k account and the funds there into my initial deal. So that's great to hear you speak on that.
So you're right. I was sorry to interrupt, but I will tell you that the self-directed IRA enables you to invest in others' deals as a passive investor.
Yep.
It doesn't enable you to put that into your own deal. So that's one of the prohibitions. So, after this, you can, if you go off and you Google self-directed IRAs, there's a ton of YouTube videos, ton of education and information out there. But it's still retirement-related funds, so they're not letting you put that. So one of these deals that I did, for example, I couldn't put my own retirement funds into that deal. That would be self-dealing. And so it does enable you to invest in other people's opportunities. And likewise, other people can invest their self-directed IRA funds into your opportunity. As you're kind of reaching out to your network, sometimes you might hear, I don't have $75,000. And if you talk to them and you say, well, hey, do you have any 401k retirement funds from a prior employer that is sitting around or sitting in an account? And they may say, yeah, I've got $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, but that's in my retirement funds. Then you have an opportunity to educate them about how they can unleash that and put that into these types of opportunities. So apologies for interrupting you, but I wanted to make sure
that's great. That's great. I wanted to ask your thoughts on, you see different scenarios where some people go about taking lines of credit or taking equity out of their primary in order to leverage that as some sort of capital towards a deal. Well, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that is a feasible approach, or do you think that is a risky approach? I just would love to get your thoughts on that, like taking equity out of your primary if you have equity, and or leveraging lines of credit against your primary to get that first deal off the ground.
Yeah, so it depends on the size and scale of what you're trying to do. So in earlier in my kind of real estate life, I've certainly taken equity out of my personal home and leveraged that to do other things. But I would not be trying to do that in connection with the deals that I'm doing now. So if I'm purchasing something for 30 million or 40 million and I'm trying to raise 8 to 13 million, the equity in my home isn't really going to be meaningful in relative to that type of scale of deal. But let's say that you want to go buy I talked about my 5-unit acquisition. I certainly could have pulled equity out of my home and that could have been part or all of my down payment to go buy a 5-unit or something even smaller. In terms of risk, that's going to come down to what your personal risk tolerance is and your personal situation. And so I'm hesitant to kind of offer too much there without knowing anything about you or your situation. But I think real estate is all about leverage. And so if you can leverage equity in either your personal residence or another asset, and that will enable you to unlock value in an opportunity that you wouldn't otherwise be able to access, by all means, I would be very comfortable doing that. But again, it depends on what scale you're looking at.
Got it. And could you share some guidance around business plans, webinars to present to prospective investors? Would love to get your thoughts on what you've done and what you've seen in terms of best practices and in order to gain and capture the interest and ultimately commitment from your prospective investors.
Yeah, so it's not a. I mentioned that I'm not an overnight success. So we could go down a rabbit hole if we're not careful. So I'm gonna let Joel kind of steer me if I'm going too far astray. But so for me, when you're reaching out to friends and family, these are individuals, colleagues, former coworkers that you've established connection with and relationships with over 20 plus years. And so my largest investor on my first deal was actually a law school classmate. When we graduated in 97, and I'm coming up on my 25th reunion next month from law school, I had not been in communication with this individual since law school, but reconnected with him via a friend that we have in common, and ultimately he invested. So it's refreshing those relationships that you've developed along the way. There's no magic formula. And that's 2 years of me pursuing opportunities. That's 2 years of me putting myself out there on social media, doing things like we're doing today, doing podcast interviews as a guest, attending conferences in person. So all of those things are ingredients in developing an investor network. And so by the time you have an opportunity, it's more of a continuation of an ongoing conversation that you've already engaged them with, as opposed to I've got an opportunity and what are the things I need to do to make this attractive to people who you may not have spoken with in years, or you have a kind of a surface relationship with them. And this game, all capital raising is about, do I know you? Do I like you? And can I trust you with my money? And so that doesn't happen overnight.
I just put that in my notes. So go ahead.
Yeah,
that's the point I was just going to cover.
That doesn't happen overnight. So that's you may need to touch someone 3, 4, 5, 6 times. There are people that I presented my initial opportunity to who passed on that opportunity, passed on the deal that we just closed in November, a 200-unit, $40 million transaction. And they may pass on the next one that I shared with them. You never know when their personal circumstances or situation are going to be such that they are now ready to put their dollars into your opportunity. So it's an investment. So I've talked a couple times about making an investment. It's an investment of your time to be talking to be educating these people within your network. You can't just give up because, you had some conversation with them and then lo and behold, they chose not to invest. That investment may be 2 years from now, and they may turn out to be one of your biggest investors, but they've been watching you and they've been kind of studying you and following you. I have people that reach out to me and they say, "Hey, Clive, I've I've been following you on LinkedIn for the last 2 years. And I'm like, really? You've never commented on my posts. You've never messaged me. I had no idea. And so all that time, I'm touching people via social media in a way that I can't one-to-one or can't even via a Zoom, but you never know who you're talking to. And so there is no magic formula. There's a combination of things that you need to be doing. And I'd be happy to follow up with you offline. And I'd even share with you the webinar that I've done for, one of my deals. So you get a firsthand look at what that looks like for educational purposes.
And no, that'd be awesome, and truly appreciate that opportunity that you're extending. This is great insight. I don't want to ask too many questions. I feel like I'm getting even more inspired just getting the feedback and the hearing your responses. And so this is great. I feel like it sounds to me like I'm somewhere a replica of where you started out at in terms of my thought process and some of the things I've been thinking about. So it's good. It's refreshing to hear the tidbits of your journey and how you got to where you are.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Uriah. We appreciate it. And you hit on a lot of points. I do want to circle back on a couple things. That question came up about would you take equity out of your house? And Clive was spot on in saying it really depends on your situation and what you feel comfortable with. However, a lot of people, and Clive, we'll talk about this a little bit as well. A lot of people take the mindset of, I've got to pay my house off and I got to have all this money saved up in order to retire. And it's actually a misnomer, because if you think about it, the reason why they're wanting to save that money up is so that they can draw it down to live off of. So what that really means is that you need cash flow. You don't need a whole bunch of money stashed away. So as long as you have cash flow by owning multifamily properties or something else, you'll be okay, right? And so being less concerned about, I've got to have all this equity in my house and pay this note off is, in my mind anyway, more important to take those dollars and actually put them to work where you can actually buy more properties and create more cash flow for yourself than just having a little small house that's one asset and is free and clear and all your equity is locked up and frozen in that one piece of property. So I don't know, Clive, you have any thoughts on that one way or the other?
No, I mean, I'm in agreement. Everyone's got to do their own personal kind of assessment and evaluation as to what makes sense for them. And again, risk tolerance. So some people are like, oh, no, that's way too risky. Some people would say, when I decided to move all of my money out the stock market, the only money I had left in the stock market was college savings, 529 money for the kids. Outside of that, I moved all of my retirement funds into a self-directed IRA. Now, someone would say, I talk to people, to Uriah's comment. So I'm talking to people, friends, colleagues, people within the network, either in connection with a live deal or kind of in anticipation of an upcoming deal. So I talk to people who are well compensated, in good jobs, and I talk to them about moving retirement funds into a self-directed IRA. And it's almost, for some of them, it's almost as if I insulted their religion. And the thought of touching retirement funds, they're comfortable with the volatility of the stock market. They're comfortable because we've all been educated that, you whatever it is these days, you put $20K a year into your 401k, you benefit from whatever company match, and then you hope that you've accumulated enough such that you can retire at 65 and hopefully you don't live too long because you're going to run out of whatever's there. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying that that's one thing that you should be doing. But what are the other things that you're going to be doing? If you're concerned about creating generational wealth, I don't know of anyone who's created generational wealth as a result of them putting away $19,000 or $20,000 a year into their retirement fund. So you got to be doing more than that. And one of the things that we've all been kind of educated on is the power of diversification, or the necessity of diversification. So I would say, again, from a risk management standpoint, it's very risky for you to have all of your funds in the stock market, in stocks, individual stocks, mutual funds, what have you. Again, I talk to people and I raise that topic, and some of them are like, okay, I've never heard of that, I'll look into it. And others are like, oh man, no, I would never touch my retirement funds.
Right.
I'm like, okay, this is not going to be an opportunity for you right now. You don't have the mindset right now to be open to, what I'm sharing with you. And that's okay, because we all come to it at different points in time.
Yeah, and that's all very, very true. And it's all about mindset. It's all about what are you ready to do. I've just and you're right. You might want to think about it. And we've had these conversations before that if a person was, and not just you, but if a person was focused on, I got to have all this money saved up and I got to have my house paid for, you could certainly put that money to work in an investment, even if it's a 5 unit. Turn that maybe 2x it, 3x it, and then take those proceeds and pay down that principal, if that's your focus, right? I mean, me personally, I would put that in another investment and just rinse and repeat, but that's me. I'm a little bit more risk less adverse than most people. But you're right, you got to do something, because to me, one of the scariest things in the world is to walk into a job and they say, you know what, we don't need you anymore, or we're being bought out by so-and-so and they're cutting this department. And you could have had 20 years, like in your case there, on a job, and then tomorrow you don't have it. One of my boys worked for one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and he had 30 plus years in, and they just one day told him, hey, we're shutting down this division. And that was it, right? So, the need to diversify and be self-dependent is extremely important. So, and then Clive also, just one other point that I thought was very good. And like I said, you took my notes here. But at the end of the day, people still do business with people they know, like, and trust. If they don't know you, if they don't trust you, they're not going to do business with you. And you almost have to, not almost, you do have to build your network before you need it. Build those relationships, plant those seeds. And somewhere down the road, as you mentioned, there might be somebody following you that says, hey, this guy has a track record. I like what he's doing, and I'm going to get in on his next deal. And, you even got to look at yourself, because sometimes people come to you with things. You're like, man, I'll never invest with you or do this or do that. But then if you see that they're successful, it's like, okay, we'll give that some consideration. We get that all the time with people that come to us to raise capital. And it's like, you've never had any success. You've never done this before. Why should I put my time into backing your deal to raise capital for you? Unless there's a huge retainer.
Yeah.
So you got to look at things that way. So all of that's very true, from that standpoint. So did you jump actually from a 5 unit straight to I think you said 94 unit, or were there some other small iterations along the way?
244 unit. So we sold that 5 unit in 2008, actually 2021, end of the first quarter, a couple of weeks into COVID's onset. And then we acquired a 244 unit in November of 21. So, I basically said, okay, I'm not doing any more small multifamily. The small multifamily served a purpose for me, because in order to sustain myself, having gone from being highly compensated to no compensation, beyond savings, I was able to look to the passive cash flow from my rental properties, and then ultimately the sale proceeds. So the duplex, when I sold that in 2018, that resulted in cash proceeds that I had to work with and leverage. And then ultimately, when I sold the 5 unit, I was able to take back out the equity I put into it plus what I made on the deal. So that helped sustain me. And then that also served as kind of my skin in the game when it came time for me to get my first big deal, which is that 244 unit. I had, the cash that I needed to at least say, I've got my own money in the deal too. So I'm asking you for $75,000, but I've got at least twice that in the deal. So yeah, I went from that 5 unit to the 244 units, closed that in November 21, and we got awarded the 200 unit that we acquired in February. We got awarded that in November, the same week that we closed on that first deal. So I talk about not being an overnight success and it taking me 2 years of kind of pursuing opportunities and being a bridesmaid but never a bride. Ultimately, I did 2 deals in excess of 70 million over a 3-month window. And I'm pursuing more now with a goal of doing 4 of those deals this year, 2022.
All right. Well, that's true. You do got to kiss a lot of frogs. So A lot of offers, even myself, I put out there, and sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't, sometimes they come back around, as you know, because they would have gone on the contract with somebody else and not worked out. We're looking at a deal like that right now, so it certainly can happen. So, Uriah, did you have something else you wanted to share just before we wrap up today?
Yes, sir. So there's a couple of things. I would say three things. Well, four things. The first thing is, once again, Mr. Davis, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to connect with us. I think Joel has really set a high standard and a high bar with creating this platform, and I'm continuously inviting others to come in and chime in. So thanks to the two of you. The second thing is, would love to get some thoughts, and maybe we may not have enough time to cover here, but I'm very interested in any guidance or insights that you can share around establishing syndicates or a syndication. I don't know if you leverage an attorney to get it set up. I know there's a lot of complexity to some degree with doing that. The third thing, I thought it was very profound to hear that you was transparent with your investors, telling them how much you've put into the deal. So I think that's good to hear. And then the third thing, or the last thing, it would be neat to follow up with you with any additional questions, or if you're in the Atlanta area, I'm also in the Atlanta area. If you're going to be somewhere on the part of town, just to connect with you. So those are the four things I want to kind of leave here with.
So thanks for the feedback. I'm not going to take them in order, so you'll need to refresh me. But in terms of the investors, yeah, it's transparency, but it's rare that you're going to do a webinar and you're not going to get that question. Well, how much do the sponsors have in the deal? So you want to proactively head that off and be prepared to share that information. And so that's something that we talk to them, and we say, as a sponsorship team, we have in aggregate, X dollars in the deal, 7 figures, if it's 7 figures, whatever the case may be. And we can certainly connect. I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm active on Facebook. Joel, I don't know how you do it, but I'm open to my information, my contact information being shared with attendees. That's not a problem. You can reach me at Clive, CLIVE, at parkroyalcapital.com, and we can connect via that email and go from there. And then the syndication piece, that's part of the education. That's part of the journey. You don't go raise 13 million without a lawyer. It is a securities offering. So not only do you need a lawyer to handle the transactional piece. So while I'm a lawyer and I'm certainly capable of doing it, it would be malpractice for me to do the lawyering on a deal that I'm offering to investors. So we absolutely go get a lawyer to handle the transactional piece, which is just the purchase and sale agreement, the traditional docs that you need to acquire. But then there's the securities piece, and that's where we're putting together a private placement memorandum and all of the supporting cast of securities-related documents that you need to share transparently, disclosing the risk associated with the opportunity and all of that. So the legal is certainly one of the key third parties that you need to do one of these. Again, if you're serious about going down this journey, there's a lot of education that you got to do. I can point you in the direction of where you might find that.
Okay. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. So y'all can pick up on that offline, and we're kind of coming up on the end of the show for today. And we certainly appreciate all the insights and all the good information. Clive, as you know, that this show is really designed for minorities that are trying to grow in the commercial real estate space. They're trying to get their footing. What closing words would you have for that next generation, or those ones that are really just trying to get themselves going in this space that is often cloaked in secrecy? What words would you have for them in closing?
Yeah, so in many respects, it's a country club of sorts. And so you got to figure out what is the right attire? Where should the fork, the knife, the spoon, where should they be? You've got to educate yourself. The biggest thing that I would say to the younger version of myself or others who are kind of aspiring to get into this space, we are woefully underrepresented in the commercial real estate space. I think we're less than 2% of the commercial real estate space is occupied by African Americans, which is, it's an understatement to say it's unsatisfactory. So you got to figure out if you want to do it, how do I break into this space? And so the best way to do it is to seek out mentorship, seek out individuals who are doing what it is that you want to do. And so despite that kind of poor representation, wherever you are, so in the case of Uriah, I was just on a panel 2 weeks ago hosted by the African American Real Estate Professional AAREP Atlanta chapter, where they put on an event which was entitled Wealth Building in Minority Communities. And so I was one of 4 panelists. We had a great turnout, and that's an organization. You can go to aarep.org and navigate to the Atlanta chapter, and there's a wealth of resources for you if you're in Atlanta. So again, you need to be networking with people who have a vested interest in seeing you be successful in the commercial real estate space. That's really their mission, is to empower those of us who are underrepresented in the commercial real estate space, to empower us to be successful and to break into the space. The biggest thing I would say is start sooner than you think. So, if I have zero regrets, because everything that I did prepared me to sit in the chair that I'm sitting in now. But I didn't need to do 20 years before I pivoted and turned my direction towards this. There's more that I could have been doing, even as a full-time, working in a highly demanding job. There's more that I could have been doing in terms of educating myself, in terms of investing passively in these opportunities, so that I could have made for a smoother transition than what I ultimately had. I would just say, be willing to give your time free to someone. If you want to be a syndicator, Uriah, I would say go find someone who's syndicating and offer yourself up, offer them value, something that they could use. And in doing so, you're going to be educated. And in return, you're going to be giving them hopefully something of value. So don't wait until you are, done with your corporate life to make that pivot. Start earlier would be my answer. I do host a group on Facebook. If I could just give a shout out to the group, it's the African American Multifamily Investor Network. It's a Facebook group I started probably about 2 years ago. And right now there's about 1,200 of us in the group, and it's strictly focused on multifamily. So you can certainly join that group. We have everyone from people who have never owned real estate and they're just thinking about, well, how would I go about buying a duplex that I could house hack and live in one side? And then we have people on the other end of the spectrum who have closed transactions of 1,200, 1,300 units in one deal, and everyone in between. And then all of the roles, there are many different roles. If you want to be in commercial real estate, there's, it's not just go be a syndicator. That's certainly one thing that you can do. But there are so many lanes within commercial real estate that you can occupy. You got to figure out, what do you gravitate towards? What do you want to do? What's your short, medium, and longer term goals? But seek out those people who can share with you their information, their experience, and help you navigate a path that they've already gone down.
Yeah, very good advice. I always say we can do more together than apart. So, we come together and work together and educate and learn from each other and work together. There's a lot that we can be done. That combined effort can produce some great results. So appreciate you sharing that. By the way, the head of the Atlanta chapter of the AARP is going to be our guest, I think, in a couple of weeks. So we'll certainly be talking more about that and hopefully get their involvement as well. So excellent. I certainly appreciate it, Clive. A lot of good information. And one of the biggest things that you covered that we were looking to cover today is, how do I get from A to B? That's always the hardest part. How do I go from owning nothing or just this little something here all the way over to here? And that's where it gets real foggy for a lot of people. So you provided a lot of clarity, and we certainly appreciate you taking the time out to do that. So, and we appreciate Uriah and our other guests for being here as well today. So as always, this is the Mornings with Joel CRE podcast. We're happy you were with us today. We certainly want to thank Clive Davis for being with us today. And Clive, I'm sure we'll be talking more about many other deals and other things in the near future. So thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me, Joel. And I invite folks to reach out and connect with me offline, one-to-one.
All right, fantastic. Take care, everyone. Have a great afternoon. We appreciate you. See you soon.
You've been listening to Mornings with Joel, Commercial Real Estate Podcast, where we focus on rising stars and established players in commercial real estate and talk to them about how they are building legacies in today's marketplace. Please check back weekly to hear our upcoming guests.